How many of you have ever struggled to forgive somebody? I mean, Pastor Nick, you're just starting right off the bat. You're talking about hard stuff right now. We have all struggled to forgive somebody, right? You may have struggled to forgive somebody on your car ride this morning. Your kid was driving you crazy. Your spouse was driving you crazy, and they're tapping, they're doing this. They forgot to, and you just, Forgiveness is something that's really hard for us to do. It seems like an easy concept, but it's so hard to do because people can be hurtful, people can be selfish, people break promises, and where does that leave us? It leaves us with pain. It leaves us with hurt, and what do we do with it then? Turn to your neighbor and look at him and say, forgiveness is hard. Maybe you needed to say that to somebody. So why is it so hard to forgive? Let's talk through a few reasons. One of the reasons that forgiveness is so hard is because the pain is so deep. Any of you have some deep pain? This could be stuff that not just happened yesterday, but stuff that's 30 years ago stuff. Somebody betrayed you, somebody abused you, somebody neglected you, and you are carrying deep pain. Maybe the pain is so deep because they've never apologized. There's never been remorse on their part. There's never been any regret, and they haven't changed their actions at all. When we experience things like that and people haven't changed and you're still facing them all the time, and it's just, that's hard to forgive. Another reason that is hard to forgive is because we like justice. How many of you like justice? That means you want the wrong to righted. You want there to be a consequence. You want there to be a repercussion for the action. You want them to feel what you felt. Like you have this desire for that to happen. And what happens with us is sometimes that desire to be justified actually overshadows us forgiving them. And you think, well, how can I forgive them? Nothing's happened to them. And you think that if I forgive them, does that mean that what they did was okay? And the answer to that is no. It doesn't mean what they did was okay. But it means that you're releasing it and you're moving on. Forgiveness is not an endorsement for people to behave poorly. Here's another reason that people struggle with forgiveness. Because we all like to be in control. Any of you like to be in control? You want to be in control of life. And sometimes holding that forgiveness makes you feel in control. And I will use it, and I will still be in control over them. For others of you, forgiveness is if you forgive, then the walls that you have built up to protect yourself have to come down. Sometimes unforgiveness is just that. It is you have built walls to protect yourself. But the problem is when you build walls, you can't have relationship with people. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most profound statements in the Bible. It will challenge you to your core. By the way, if you don't know what your core is, it's this area. Some of us have more core than others. One of the things as I am getting older is that I am not as flexible as I once used to be. Have any of you ever just seen somebody do a physical movement and you're like, ooh, that hurts my back just looking at them. I just can't bend that way anymore. When you were a kid, you could bend backwards, you're doing somersaults, all kinds of things, and now you that gives me a migraine to look at them, right? If I bend back further than this, I might not get back, right? Or if I try to touch down, some of you might try to touch down, touch your toes, you might not get back up. You throw your back out, you're out of all sorts. Here's what happens. I want you to think about when you are trying to stretch. If you stretch so much, what ends up happening? You could actually hurt yourself. You could break yourself. It's like a rubber band that you stretch too far. Can I tell you, forgiveness is something that we need to practice. It's something that just doesn't happen overnight. It's something that we have to work on throughout our lifetime to stay flexible with our forgiveness. We're going to talk about a phrase today that rocks me to my core. And we'll go through the reasons of the why it rocks me to the core. But here's our 3 words that we're going through today. I forgive you. I forgive you. There's somebody in the room today that probably needs to hear that from somebody else in this room. There's somebody in your household or somebody at your place that you work at. Maybe there's somebody on the other side of town, or maybe there's a relative that needs to hear, I forgive you. We're going to be in Luke chapter 23, verse 32. Let me set this up for you. Jesus was praying in a garden in the middle of the night, and he was arrested. He was arrested, then he was put on trial, an illegal trial. And as he's put on this illegal trial, they start accusing him of all of these things, and none of them are accurate. None of them are true. And what ends up happening is they beat him, they whip him, they mock him, and even though they could find no wrongdoing, the people still wanted to hurt Jesus. They wanted to punish Jesus. A man by the name of Pilate, who was in charge of the area, he brings Jesus and he brings this other criminal to the forefront, and he says, who do you want me to release? Do you want me to release this criminal, or do you want to release Jesus? And they say, no, release the criminal. Well, what do you want me to do with Jesus? And they shout out, crucify him. I mean, this is a big deal. They shout out, crucify him. And so Jesus is being led to be crucified. And we pick up the story here, chapter 23, verse 32. 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. I need you to catch something here. It doesn't say when Jesus was nailed to the cross and he was screaming in agony and he could barely breathe and he's suffocating on his own spit that he calls on God to burn them with fire from heaven. Because that's what we would have done, right? We would have called on God to pull us off of that cross, to justify us, to annihilate every single person that has ever hurt us in our life. That's what you and I would do. But Jesus is on that cross in the midst of the most agonizing, painful way that you can die. And he utters these words, Father, forgive them. I mean, when I read something like that rocks me to my core. How in the deepest, darkest, most painful moment of his entire existence, how could he pray for forgiveness for those who hurt him? And that's why he's our Savior. So who was he praying for? He was praying for all the people that day. He was praying for forgiveness. What is forgiveness? This is what forgiveness means in Greek, aphiemi. Aphiemi. It means to let go or to give up a debt. To give up a debt. That means when he is praying, Father, forgive them, he is praying that there would be a canceling of their debts. So who was he praying for? He was praying for the religious leaders who thought Jesus was just a false prophet and he was not the Messiah. He was praying for those who had conspired against him, those who had wrongfully put him on trial. He was praying for the Jews, the mob of people that were there who were yelling, crucify him, when he was an innocent man. He was praying, Father, forgive them. For the Roman soldiers who stretched out his body and took nails that were about 9 inches or longer and shoved them and hammered them through his flesh. And then after he's on that cross, what does it say they're doing? They're gambling for his clothes. Jesus is crying out, Father, forgive them, for the crowd who was around him while he is on the cross, who is mocking him, taunting him. When Jesus was on that cross and he was saying, Father, forgive them, he was canceling the debt of all humanity. Anyone that would call on his name, anyone that would receive him as Lord and Savior. From his very point of suffering, he asked for the forgiveness of others. When he was on that cross and he was crying, Father, forgive them, you know who he was praying for? He was praying for the criminals. You know who he was praying for? He was praying for those who are addicted. Do you know who he was praying for? Those who have been abusers. Those who have been prideful. Those who have been selfish. You could list any issue that somebody has. That's who he was praying for. He was praying for forgiveness for all of humanity. In his deepest, most painful moment of existence, he asked for your forgiveness because we didn't know. His grace, his forgiveness, it's not something that we can earn. It is a gift that we have to receive. If you're here today and you don't know who Jesus is, or maybe you've come from a different faith background, and what does this mean? How does this compare? Can I tell you the single most thing that separates Christianity from all other faiths out there is the idea of grace. Grace, what does that mean? It means unmerited favor. It means that you cannot earn forgiveness, that you have been extended mercy, that you have been extended this gift because that's who he is. It's not that, hey, you're such a great person, that, hey, you walked enough old ladies across the street over your life that you are going to get to heaven. And no. It is having a relationship with Jesus, and then he gives this gift to you in exchange. You give him sin, he gives you grace. Romans chapter 8, verse 8 says it this way. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son. Another phrase that you may hear me say often here at CLA is, while we were still sinners, he saved us. He paid the price for us in our worst. He gave his best. Our mission here at CLA is this: to love God, to love people, and to love people to God. And I want to tell you this. If you say that you love God, then you must extend forgiveness to others. And I understand that's a challenge. I understand that that's hard. I understand that that may seem impossible. But it's what we're called to do. It's what we're told to do, to extend forgiveness to others, because forgiveness and love are linked. You cannot forgive somebody without loving them. And you can't love them without forgiving them. They are linked. The next point today is this: we need to learn to forgive like Christ. Ephesians 4:32 says it this way: instead, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. We need to learn to forgive others even when it hurts. And I know that seems like an impossible standard. How are we supposed to forgive others even when it hurts? How are we supposed to forgive those who abandoned us, those who betrayed us, those who abused us? We can't even forgive the big rigs on 58 when we're trying to get up the hill. Right? I mean, when we put that in comparison and we're like, this is normal life and this is like every day, and you want me to forgive somebody who betrayed my trust, and it's what we're called to do. That's why we have to be in the habit of practicing forgiveness, because forgiveness and love are linked. If you want to grow in love, you've got to grow in forgiveness. Forgiveness often requires us to do this to release pain, to release pride, and to release the desire for revenge. Forgiveness isn't about excusing wrongs, but it is about letting go of bitterness in our heart. Oftentimes we think, oh, hey, if I forgive somebody, does that mean, like I said, it's okay that you hurt me? No, when you forgive somebody, you're letting go of the pain. You're letting go of the bitterness. And that does a few things. It shows them Christ's unconditional love, mercy, and grace. But it also does some things for you as well. Christ forgave those who tortured and crucified him. And we can't forgive our neighbor who doesn't put their trash far enough in the trash can, and then when the wind comes, it blows their trash all over our lawn. We need to be in the habit of practicing forgiveness. The next point is this, that forgiveness helps us. Look to the person next to you and say, forgiveness helps you. And then tell them you need to forgive. There's a story in the Bible in Matthew chapter 18, verse 32. We're going to get there in just a moment, but I want to set this story up for you. There's a king who had an entrepreneur come to the king. And this king said, King, I have an incredible idea that is going to make you a lot of money and me a lot of money. I just need you to loan me $3 million. And within 1 year, you will make double your money. So the king says, yes, all right, I will do this. And he gives this man a loan. And the year comes up, and the man's entrepreneurship, his business that he started, it belly flopped. It didn't go anywhere. All the money was gone, and he had nothing to show for it. So the king comes to the man, and he says, where's my money? I don't have it. And he says, then I am going to put you and your family into servitude for the rest of your life. And the man who took the money, he pleaded with the king. I want you to imagine he is on his knees, begging the king, telling him, promising him, I will do whatever it takes. I promise you that I will repay every single penny until the last breath that I have. I will give everything that I have to repay this debt. And the king is convinced. And he forgives the debt. The man who had been forgiven this debt, he then is walking home, and as he's walking home, he sees his neighbor who's outside working on their yard, and he goes, hey, Bob, you owe me $100. Remember you borrowed $100 a month ago, and you said that you were going to give it back to me in a week? It's been a month. Where's my money? And Bob's like, I don't have it. I'm so sorry. I just need a little bit more time. This man is so mad that he goes over to Bob. He grabs him by the throat and he says, you will repay me. And he takes him to the local jail and he throws him in jail and says, you will stay here until you pay me back. Well, the king hears about this. And the king is trying to figure out, how could the person who has been forgiven so much hold a grudge on something so small? So he goes and he finds that entrepreneur and he throws him in jail. We're going to pick up the story here. Matthew 18, verse 32. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Now, I've read this story a lot of times in my life, but when I read this story this week, you know, the word that stood out to me was the word tortured. To be thrown in prison, to be tortured because of his unwillingness to forgive someone else. Verse 35. That's why my heavenly Father what he will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. I want you to catch something here. When we do not extend forgiveness to others, you are inviting torture into your life. I know that's an extreme way of putting it, but how many of you know people that need to forgive somebody for something, but they are being tortured because they're unwilling to do it? That torture affects them in their mind. They can't sleep. They're anxious. They're depressed. They have all of these things happening. That torture can even extend into our physical bodies, where when we don't forgive, we have this bitterness that is just growing and developing and getting bigger and bigger in our lives, and it will eat you alive when you do not forgive others. Unforgiveness is linked to torture. There are people here today that you need to be freed from anger, from resentment, from bitterness, so that healing can take place. You know, when I meet with people and I'm doing counseling with people and different things in their life, maybe it's just for them personally, maybe it's for their marriage. You know, one of the first questions I always ask is, have you forgiven that person? Well, but I just... You're not going to get anywhere until you can start to forgive. Forgiveness is hard. It's really hard. And it's especially hard to forgive those things that happened to us when we were children, maybe by people who should have been taking care of us or protecting us. And they betrayed us, abandoned us, neglected us, abused us. I want to encourage you today to forgive, to release the bitterness, to release the resentment, the anger, to free yourself from prison. And how do we do that? We don't do that just because we're so amazing. We do that because he's so amazing. Because he gave us this gift of grace while we were still sinners. We didn't earn it. In our worst, he gave his best. There's a story of some children who were at a birthday party for about a 5-year-old. And if you've never been to a 5-year-old birthday party, it's a lot of kids screaming, running around. There's a lot of sugar involved, and you know, it can be hectic. But one of the things that happens typically at these parties is the parents or whoever's throwing the party on, they give out like little party bags to the kids, right? Little trinkets, little things like that. Sometimes it's candy and whatnot. Well, this particular family, they went all out, and they gave bags of candy that were full-size candy bars. And every kid that came in, they got this bag and they looked in there and they're like, yes! And every other kid's parent is like, no! Now I got to deal with that kid all day. And you know, when you have these birthday parties that you go for, that your kids go to, they typically send like an RSVP. I want you to imagine you're at this birthday party. You've got all these gift bags out. They're full-size candy bars in there, and you've given them all out. Everybody's arrived that said they were coming, and in walks another kid who never RSVP'd. And you're like, what am I going to do? Now you welcome the kid in. Hey, we're glad that you're here. Have some fun. But this kid comes in, and he sees all these other kids holding the bag and is like, what do they got in that bag? And he goes over and he talks to another kid and he says, hey, what's in that bag? And he opens the bag up and shows him. And he's like, whoa, look at all those candy bars. And then he asks the question, can I have one? And the kid with the bag of candy bars looks at him and says, no, these are mine. Now, let's say the father of the birthday boy is at a distance and he's kind of watching what's happening and he's looking and trying to see, sometimes as parents, you kind of sit on the sideline because you're trying to give your child the opportunity to respond on their own, right? To do it the right way. So the kid who didn't get the candy, he walks away. He's kind of, disappointed. But the dad goes to this other boy and he says, hey, how come you didn't give that boy a candy bar? Well, because I wanted it. Well, you got a lot in there, right? Yeah. Well, why didn't you give him a candy bar? Because it's mine. All right. Did you buy that candy bar? No. Did you buy all those candy bars that were in there? No. So you're telling me that somebody gave you this bag of candy to you? They gave it to you for free? Yeah. But you don't want to give any of it to anybody else? No. It's mine. We're talking about 5-year-olds, right? So the dad takes the candy bag and he kind of spreads it out on a table and he says, listen, moves half of the candy that way, half of the candy this way. And he says, if you had this much candy over here, is that still more candy than what you walked in with? Yes. Is that still more candy than you could eat in one day? Yes. And you don't want to give that boy who came in and he doesn't have any candy? No. Why don't you want to give away what was freely given to you? And he says, I bet you it will make that little boy's day if you will go take one of those candy bars and you go give it to him. Okay. So the dad kind of goes to the side and he's happy. He's, helped a child to be kind and share with another child. And so he goes over and he gives this boy a candy bar and says, hey, I just wanted to give this to you. And I know you didn't get a bag of candy, so here you go. And the little boy lights up and he throws his arm around him and gives him the biggest bear hug and is like, thank you so much. I wanted a candy bar. So a little later on, the dad in the party, he's kind of been watching, seeing what's going on, and he notices the boy that gave the candy bar away, and he goes over to him and just gonna check on him, see how he's doing. He goes over to him and says, hey, how are you doing on those candy bars? Did you eat them all? No, I didn't eat them all. Well, where's your candy bag? And he said, that hug felt so good from that little boy. He said that I wanted to feel some more of that. So I walked around and I gave my candy to everybody else. And he said, and that made me feel really good. Jesus gave a beautiful, amazing, wonderful gift to you. Grace, forgiveness, mercy. You didn't pay for it, but he gave it to you. And here's what too many of us do. We will say yes to Jesus. Yes, I want this forgiveness. Yes, you're going to give me grace in exchange for my sins. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And yes, I want this. But then as we learn more about faith, we learn about what he asks of us to do. We learn that he wants us to extend this gift of grace and forgiveness to other people. And we're like, that's hard. That doesn't make me want to do that. But a gift that was given freely to you that didn't cost you anything. A gift that has transformed your life. A gift that if we extended to other people, what would it do for them? It may show them the love of Jesus that they have never seen before. And as you give a gift like that as well, it frees you. That's why we need to give forgiveness. And again, I know that's not an easy thing to do, and I know that's not always an overnight situation. This isn't like somebody bumped you in Walmart and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no problem. I forgive you. I get it. There are big situations. There are traumatic things that have happened in our lives. But we're still called to forgive.